You're listening to the Confidence Within podcast. If you are a successful professional entrepreneur who is nonetheless struggling with the fear of public speaking, then you are in the right place. This podcast is all about igniting your inner confidence, learning to show up with genuine authority and brilliance, and becoming the best version of yourself. I'm your host, Victoria Lesnyansky, and welcome to my show. Hello, and welcome to this episode of the Confidence Within podcast. A while back, I was invited to give a virtual training, and one of the things I talked about was speaking impromptu. I know, nobody who struggles with public speaking anxiety enjoys impromptu speaking. When my clients join my program, they always tell me that their worst nightmare is improvised, unrehearsed speaking in public. So today I wanted to share with you a short segment of my training and give you some practical tips that you can start applying right away. I hope you enjoy. I think the absolutely scariest thing that you may be ever asked to do is to give an impromptu speech, right? There is nothing more scary when someone asks you a question and you have to answer on the spot, right? Or when you are at a business meeting and you have to speak up all of a sudden without being prepared, or when you are in a social situation and you have to stand up and give a toast, right? There are so many situations where impromptu speech, impromptu presentation is required. And today I want to share with you some pointers on how to make this experience a little less crazy and scary, a little more pleasant, and a little easier for you to do. Somebody may ask you a question on the spot. Very often, something like this could be rehearsed and prepared for. So a very common impromptu situation is, particularly if you are an entrepreneur or business professional, is somebody asking you what you do. Hey, what do you do? Right? How common is that? It's an impromptu situation, but this is a question that comes up all the time. So what I always tell my students to do is be prepared for impromptu questions that seem to be kind of on the spot, but really are not. Prepare for it, right? It's very, very simple to rehearse what you're going to say. What do I do? Think about it, make it benefit driven, create that statement, you're ready to go, rehearse it a few times. So then later, if the situation comes up where somebody says, oh, what do you do? You're not like, you actually have a little statement that's ready to go, right? So that's one situation. That's a very easy situation to handle. A different situation would be where you're asked a question about something that you simply don't know, right? And there are different ways you can go about it. If a question is about something that you really have no clue about, sometimes it's probably better to just admit it and say, you know what, I simply don't know anything about it, I'm so sorry. Rather than go into a conversation about something that you just gonna make erroneous statements about, you gonna make a whole bunch of mistakes. It's sometimes better to just admit the lack of knowledge. If you have a question like this where you are asked to talk about something, again, you don't really know much about, but you know just a little bit, then go for it. And the easiest way to do it is when you get that question, it's probably best to start by saying, I'm not an expert in this, and then continue going, so that whoever you're speaking to already knows that it is what it is. You really don't claim to be an expert, so they don't expect you to just start throwing out numbers, statistics, and all kinds of stuff, right? That somebody who's an expert would know. And the way you approach a situation like this, again, when it's something that you don't know, somebody asks you a question, think about the first thing that pops into your head. First thing that pops into your head, whatever the mental image you get, and start talking about it. Because the truth is, we don't have time, right? We don't have the luxury of even 2 minutes to sit and think about it. That's why it's called impromptu. Somebody asks you a question, you have the luxury of maybe 2 seconds to think about it. And that's about it. And you can always elongate this time, giving you extra few seconds by repeating the question before you answer it, or by saying, you know what, this is such a great question, and even though I'm not an expert, this is an amazing question, this is an exciting topic to talk about, right? You can always say something, just spend 3 seconds just saying something that's very easy to say while you're thinking about the actual content of your response, right? But then what you do is, whatever the first thing that comes into your mind, start talking about it. And while you're talking about it, start thinking about what you're going to say next. The easiest way is to tell a story. When you get a question, an impromptu question, or you're just asked to talk about a certain topic that you simply don't have a clue, tell a story. This may be a really dumb example, but let me give it to you anyway. I was just thinking right before I turned on the camera, what would be a topic I know nothing about? I don't know why, but welding came into my mind. Like, I really don't know anything about welding. So if you just ask me right now, hey, Victoria, what do you think about welding? I don't know. I barely know what welding is. But if I think about it for even a couple of seconds, there is a mental image that comes in and it's completely ridiculous and has nothing to do with reality, but the mental image I get is actually the movie Flashdance. And that's the first thing I think about when I think about welding. And guess what? If this image pops into my head, I don't have the luxury, I don't have the time to start all of a sudden learning something about welding. Like, I can't, I don't have the time, I only have a second. And I need to start talking, right? So I would probably say, it's so funny that you asked me because I actually know nothing about welding. The only thing that I do know about welding, I learned in a movie called Flashdance. And I may even, do a little story around it. And while I'm giving that story, while I'm doing that story, I may think what else I can add or where I can spin it, where I can end with this. But the truth is, don't make it too hard on you. Don't make it too complicated. Whatever story comes into your head, tell that story. This is a lot easier when it's a social situation and you know the people, so you can tell the story about the people. So we've all been in that situation where it could be a birthday celebration, a wedding, and all of a sudden somebody points at you and says, hey, give a toast. Like, particularly if you're an introvert, you're like, I really, really do not want to give a toast. You're looking around, you're already scared of public speaking, right? I mean, even without it being an impromptu situation. So what do? Just give yourself a second, 2 seconds, just to whatever first story comes into your mind that has to do with this particular situation. So if, in our example, if it's a wedding, you have to know those people, otherwise you wouldn't have been invited, right? At least to some extent. Maybe you know their parents, maybe you know their relatives, you know somebody there. Tell a story that has to do with these people. And it's always better to tell a story, not just a simple story, just informational story, but it's always better to tell a story that's either funny, right? Or it's going to have a fun punchline, or evokes a feeling. Those are the stories that resonate the most, where you make people feel something that they didn't feel before. You evoke a feeling. And that's it. That's all you need to do. And then you say, congratulations, guys, right? It doesn't need to be too complicated if you go the story route. Because we all have stories about things. So somebody asks you to talk about a certain topic, unless it's like literally like welding, where where I really don't know anything about it, I probably will have a story about it. Most likely something that happened to me or something that happened to somebody I know that has to do with this topic. And I would start with that because stories are very easy for us to tell, right? You don't need to specifically prepare to tell a story. As soon as you are in a situation where you have to speak, first thing, story. What story can I tell? Easy. Tell a story. While you're telling a story, something else is going to come up. You're going to start thinking about more things. You're going to get some more mental images. And maybe while you're telling a story, you realize what you actually need to say. And then you connect that story to what, the moral is, what your point is where you're going. Because sometimes in an impromptu situation, and I know you guys experience this just like I did, you don't know what point you're going to make. You haven't figured it out yet, but you have to start talking. And that's why starting with a story, sometimes it's easy, because then you can always tie it into the point, and the point will come to you as you're talking. It's kind of like you're building little bridges. So you make that point, and then maybe you know what the next point is, and where you're leading your audience, where you're going with all of this. So you know your final point, and then you kind of build little bridges to get to that final point. That's how you do it. You just start speaking, telling a story, find a point, get to that point. Again, easier said than done, but there are ways you can prepare for situations like this. Out of all the impromptu situations that I've been in, 50% were not entirely, unexpected. I should have expected that question. I should have expected that discussion, at work, let's say, that ended up being impromptu for me, but I should have thought about it beforehand, thinking that, what can come up in that meeting where I'll have to speak? How can I prepare ahead of time? Because this is very important, guys. You want to prepare for those impromptu situations ahead of time as much as possible. If you're going to a wedding and you're a friend, you kind of know you're probably going to be asked to give a toast, right? So even if you don't want to do it, prepare for it. And then, if you don't want to do it, don't do it. But if it comes up, you are prepared. So there are kind of two things to this, right? Number one, try to prepare for those impromptu situations as much as possible. But second, whatever the first mental image comes into your head, that's what you're going to start saying. And as you're saying, you continue thinking forward, right? Where am I going with this? How am I going to finish this? What is going to be the moral of my story? And you're building little bridges to it.
This show is brought to you by my Brilliant Speakers Academy program. Brilliant Speakers Academy is an in-depth coaching program for high-level professionals and entrepreneurs. It's designed to obliterate your fear of public speaking for good, drastically improve your communication and presentation skills, and help you show up with genuine confidence, authority, and brilliance. To learn more about the program, go to www.brilliantspeakersacademy.com.